Good afternoon, everyone. I couldn't be more delighted to prologue what is going to be an extraordinary panel of some of the leading thinkers, the vanguard of the legal cannabis industry, that are shaping and defining the future of this market. I'm going to use my very brief remarks this afternoon, to frame the developments in this space and critically underscore why we think the emergence of legal cannabis globally is going to be one of the most consequential social changes of our time. And two, preview some of the trends and dynamics that are shaping this market as a preamble to the panel's conversation this afternoon. So, as a data analytics company focused exclusively on the legal cannabis space, New Frontier has spent the past 5 years trying to understand what the scale of this opportunity is. We have just completed the most comprehensive analysis of demand of cannabis in the world today. And by our estimates, there are over 260 million cannabis consumers in the world, collectively spending more than nearly $350 billion each year on cannabis products. So to put that in context, the legal market globally today is only about $20 billion or so. So the delta between the legal market and the potential unregulated market where, which consumers can be drawn from is truly extraordinary. And then a second point about the market we have in, globally today versus the legal market that's emerging is thinking about the way consumers use these products. Broadly speaking, most of that 260 million consumers are using cannabis as a wellness product. They're using it for relaxation, to improve sleep, to reduce anxiety. This doesn't include all of the medical applications that are emerging and have potential to be blockbusters in the healthcare space. There was a paper published very recently showing that compounds in cannabis appear to be quite efficacious against pancreatic cancer, one of the most virulent types of cancers that humans are exposed to. Those kinds of applications aren't included in this 350 billion, nor are many of the industrial applications. If you look at industrial hemp as bioplastics, building materials, textiles, again, not included in this $350 billion. So when we think about the emergence of this sector and all of the new applications for which cannabis can be used, the opportunity truly is extraordinary. And then a second consideration. There are a whole host of convergent forces that are accelerating the legalization, adoption, and use of cannabis. We've identified 5 in particular: expanding legal access, so markets bringing on new laws, the therapeutic efficacy, like I've just mentioned with pancreatic cancer, new product innovation, this idea of convenience and discretion. You no longer have to roll joints because there's a ton of other ways in which cannabis can be consumed, and social acceptance. 2 of the points in particular that I'd like to address are the therapeutic efficacy, which, given that we have some of the world's leading health agencies, from the World Health Organization, the US National Academy of Sciences, government health bodies, all endorsing cannabis's use as a therapy for everything from pain to epilepsy and many of these new conditions. The advancement of the therapeutic side in particular will play a critical role in reducing the barriers to legalization, particularly in more conservative markets. But it'll also lead to an ingress of new patients who may not previously have considered using cannabis, but based on their health and the fact that cannabis does appear to be effective for so many of these new applications, will lead a lot more patients to consider this, thereby expanding this market. Second, I'd like to call out new product innovation. We have come a very, very long way from the times when joints and home-made baked goods were the primary ways in which cannabis was consumed. We now have everything from non-alcoholic cannabis-infused beers to time-released nanomolecular capsules. And the diversity of innovation, of products that are being driven by the new capital in the space and the innovation in the space is enabling consumers to not only adopt cannabis in ways that feels authentic and appropriate to their own uses, but use it in increasingly specialized and targeted ways. So specifically for sleep, specifically for their wellness and training, specifically for muscle recovery after a hard workout, and everything in between. And so as you see the diversity of applications in which cannabis can be used and the ways in which it can be ingested that reflect consumers' unique preferences and needs, means that we're going to see not only a very large market, but a highly diversified market, both for consumers and in the products that they're consuming. So in that context, with the rush that we're seeing into this space, because the global market is moving quickly. In the past 5 years, we've gone from tracking 4 or 5 countries that were making substantial progress toward this to over 60 countries that have promulgated substantive cannabis laws. There's a few considerations that we would urge all of the stakeholders that are paying attention to this space to consider. One, as this industry grows, particularly as it grows globally, we must ensure that the benefits, the extraordinary benefits of this industry are equitably distributed. Two, that science, not anecdote, not instinct, and not the biases that have so long defined our global policy, shape the next generation of this industry. Third, that public health, and particularly public health around minors, are central to our decision-making. Because we do know that cannabis use, particularly amongst young people, does seem to have some deleterious effects to their development, even though those effects are not manifested once you reach adulthood. And finally, as we build this industry, or as this industry grows, we have to embrace the reality that it is going to challenge many of the long-standing stigmas, assumptions, and presumptions, many of which were not fact-based. It will require education for those who this is an entirely new concept. And based on the decisions we make today, the foundation we lay is going to define this industry for years to come. And so I don't think we could have better guides in the panel we're about to have to tell us what the best practices are, where the opportunities lie, where the risks are, and what the stakeholders can do to ensure that there is an equitable and positive growth to this industry for the years to come. So with that, I couldn't be more pleased to introduce Giadha Aguirre de Carcer, Chief Executive Officer of New Frontier Data, who will be moderating our panel of experts on the global cannabis industry. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, John. John Kagia, our Chief Knowledge Officer. That title could not be more earned. That gentleman has truly been looking at this industry like no one else, as we have in New Frontier Data. I am Giadha de Carcer, I'm the CEO and founder of New Frontier Data, and I am delighted to be introducing and moderating this panel. The global age of cannabis. One of the reasons why this topic is truly timely is because, as John noted, the industry has now expanded from what used to be North America as its epicenter to now over 60 nations around the world. And while we used to think as a plant that had medical and recreational applications, today we are beginning to see the emergence of much more sophisticated applications, such as, for instance, hemp industrial advanced applications. In Europe alone, we're beginning to see the sort of the Garniers and the Johnsons & Johnsons and the Nestles. I mean, people want to put CBD in shampoo, in creams. It is truly a revolution, and it is one of a global breadth. So today, what we are going to try to do is to demystify the industry, especially to those who may be new to it, and to give a little bit of more fact-based understanding of what are the various angles by which one can look at this industry. So we are here represented by some of the leading minds, and I mean that can speak to regulation, both North American and international, that can speak to the economics, that can speak to investment opportunities and risks. It can provide a really global perspective. And so without further ado, I am going to start with Matt here to my left, and if you could each talk a little bit about, just give us an introduction of why are you here? Why is this an interesting topic? Why do you want to speak to it? And what is the experience or angle or aspect that you can bring forth?
Well, to be honest, I almost got lost listening to John. How phenomenal is he? Wonderfully said to introduce this panel. And also, what a great conference. I'm so encouraged by all the great leaders here. I only hope that myself and our colleagues here can be as helpful when it comes to cannabis as you've all been in so many areas. Quite phenomenal. My name is Matt Nordgren. I'm CEO and founder of Arcadian Capital Management, which manages a variety of funds, both equity and debt. We've been in the space for a number of years. I think we have 30-something companies we're involved with at this point. And you know, we've had tremendous amount of exits and transactions that I hope can be helpful in today's conversation.
Martín?
Well, hi everyone. For me, it's very amazing to be here. This is my first time in this forum, and I have the expectative of listening about business, producing, selling, and buying. And luckily, I'm listening very smart people talking about the future and the main concerns of the humanity, and that's important for us, especially when we talk about so booming activity like this related to all the cannabis options for the producing and the distribution for different purposes. So my name is Martín Rodríguez. I am the executive director of the national level institution for the regulation and control of cannabis in Uruguay. As you may know, perhaps some of you know, Uruguay was the first country to fully legalize cannabis for every purposes, including the complete adult use or recreational use, or depending on how do you name that behavior. But we use the term non-medical cannabis, and for us, it's really important to share our experience and of course learn from our partners all around the world. And perhaps if I have to summarize one of my main goals in this panel is to understand better how are you looking at this activity, how do you see the future of this, and of course how can we together establish new conditions for perhaps leave behind the failed war on drugs and establish new conditions for be responsible in the management of a substance that has a very huge and wide world of opportunities, but also some known risks. And that's, from our regulation approach, one of the most things to make in balance. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Paxia, co-founder and managing partner of Poseidon. We have two funds that are dedicated to investing in the cannabis industry, and we've been at this for 6 years. So we've seen a lot of things that have changed over that course of time. We've invested in Europe, Canada, the US, Colombia, Mexico, and we're continuing to expand from there. And it's just so exciting to be here today at the International Economic Forum, because this industry really has leapfrogged from being state to state and just medical only in Canada and everything in Uruguay to all of a sudden it's unlocking and opening up in all of these new regions, and it truly is becoming an international economic phenomenon. And it's amazing to be investing alongside the entire supply chain, both the technology companies and through the entire plant touching piece of it, to really be supporting these companies to build an entire industry. So it's been tremendously rewarding, and I hope I can share some of the experiences I've seen up to this point and where I think we're headed.
Perfect. Hi, thank you for having me, Giadha. I'm Rami El-Sheikh. I'm a partner at PwC, and I lead the cannabis practice. And the reason we're in this space we've been in this space for about 4 to 5 years now, and the reason we've entered this space, it started as a Canadian industry, and it's quickly becoming a global emerging industry. One of the key things that pushed us to enter this space, actually, the demand came from existing clients that we serve in pharma, beverage, tobacco, consumer wellness, and they had a demand to understand the industry, understand whether it's going to be a risk, whether it's going to be a growth opportunity, and potentially help them how to explore this opportunity and build a business plan. So we've served most of the adjacent industries. We've also served the liquor boards, and that has been our role in terms of helping the industry grow. Thanks for having me again.
Hi, I'm Diane Scott. I am the co-founder of a venture capital firm called SX2, headquartered in London. We invest in what we call human care. So it's anything in the life sciences, emerging market healthcare, longevity, end of life, mental health, and we invest in nutraceuticals, which is ultimately what's led us to medicinal cannabis. But why I'm really here is because I'm also the chairman and CEO of JMCC Group. We are the premier provider of medicinal cannabis from Jamaica. We cultivate, process, package, export, and have customers in 5 countries in less than 24 months. So I think that JMCC is a great example of showing that there is huge demand, as we saw earlier from the presentation, but also I think our story resonates very well.
First of all, thanks, Giadha, for having me, and thanks to New Frontier, and super excited to be here. The cannabis industry, for me, I came to it about 3.5 years ago. I'm a 20-year-old M&A securities finance attorney out of Silicon Valley. I came to cannabis about 3.5 years ago, more from an investment standpoint. Back then, I had no idea what hemp was, or what marijuana was, what the difference was. And so I've learned a ton in the past 3.5 years, and I more recently joined Hoban Law Group. So my name is Brent Johnson, CEO of Hoban Law Group. We're one of the leading global cannabis law firms. All we do is work with cannabis companies both in the U.S. and globally. And it's just, for me, it's super exciting from an investment standpoint, from a business standpoint. I mean, it's truly one of the fastest growing global industries. And even for me personally, I have a personal family member that's benefiting from the use of it for a medical condition. So I'm super excited to be in the industry and be here and be amongst these professionals. And hopefully I can give some good information today.
Thank you so much. So one of the things that we'd like to do is we want to talk about risks and opportunities. I come from the intelligence collection world. And why do we want those facts? Why do we want that intel? So that we can navigate the space better. So since that you've seen that we have sort of a very diverse group of minds with very, very extensive experience, why don't we talk, when we start talking sort of at a macro level from a regulatory perspective, what do you see as the trends, risks, and opportunities? And I'm thinking that maybe I should start with Martín, given that Uruguay has led the way in many ways when it comes to that.
Okay, thank you, Giadha. First of all, it's important to admit that Uruguay have to take some risk with this political change. We didn't have any other national model to pay attention or with all this complete approach for all the purposes, the possible uses of cannabis. But our country, our lawmakers, started by identify the problems that we are having, and not only in Uruguay, I think all around the world, with the strategy named War on Drugs. We have 50 years working with that approach, and in some cases, in some countries, we can see that the medicine is worse than the condition that we are trying to attend. So I am not talking only about social problems or light problems. I am specifically talking about killings, death, and the corruption and the decrease of equality of our democracies. And that's why one of the main goals of the Uruguayan new framework try to diminish the influence of the organized crime and the narco traffic. And of course, our main, if we can establish the 3 or 4 things that our country tried to do with a new regulation for the cannabis industry is, first of all, strengthen our public health approach. This is fundamental for us. We need to, of course, leaving away the medical and scientific research, speaking about adult use. For us, it's really important to provide secure and secure product to the adults that choose to use cannabis, but also information, education at all levels, public campaigns, and that we can do it in a new regulation environment. Of course, I was talking before the combat of the narco traffic and the anti-laundering the processes. That's very important for us. And in the same way, we can put together some the rights, the individual rights. In Uruguay, we have decriminalization of any kind of drug since 1974, but was illegal to produce and distribute it. So it was legal to consume, but not to buy it.
So this is a perfect setup. So what you've heard is, when we see many of the countries that are legalizing or decriminalizing today, there are indeed some of the aspects that were just brought up by Martín in Uruguay. Fighting illicit market, healthcare, so improving the medicine and the healthcare of a population, but also, obviously, there are also investment and commercial and profit opportunities. So I wanted to sort of transition a little bit into that aspect. So Brett, can you tell us a little bit about, from a regulatory perspective and legal perspective, how do you see some of the countries addressing that? How do you see sort of the laws, the risks and opportunities around the regulation?
Sure, before I even talk about the details of the legal and regulatory framework, it's super important to understand the plant. There's the plant's the cannabis sativa L plant, and from that plant comes two kind of key components. One is the hemp side of the plant, which is by U.S. law less than 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis. The other side of that is the THC, or the marijuana side. So it's super important to understand that distinction for a number of reasons, which I'll get to. In the U.S. and in Canada and in most countries, hemp is regulated far differently from marijuana, and the business opportunities on each side differ widely. On the marijuana side, it gives you an effect. It may give you some additional benefits. On the hemp side, we can produce CBD, which you guys are probably familiar with, but arguably hemp has 50,000 industrial uses as well. Plastics and food and car doors and textiles. And so when you think about it from a global opportunity standpoint, honestly, we find ourselves flying on the hemp side a lot because the opportunity there is so great and arguably larger than the marijuana side. And so from the US to Canada to Africa to Uruguay to Colombia, whether you're on the hemp side or the marijuana side, it matters because the regulatory scheme is different. And as you look at making products, manufacturing products, shipping products across state lines and country lines, that also matters. I mean, right now, if you look at cannabis, and I'm talking about hemp and marijuana, on a global framework, one of the big challenges is import and export. As of October, under the 2018 Farm Bill in the US, hemp is now fully legal at the federal level. So we can ship that stuff all over the world. But depending on where we ship it to, will drive whether they can bring it in or not. So we often deal with clients in the US that are shipping product overseas, and we have to deal with the regulations on the other side, whether it's going to Africa or Europe or Latin America. Same with on the marijuana side. So it's really important to understand the distinction between the two parts of the plant, how those products are generated, how they're regulated, both, in the case of the US, federal regulation and also state-by-state regulation. In Canada, hemp's treated differently than it is in the US. And again, most countries are like that. The other big issue we see is, for example, in the US, marijuana is anything with greater than 0.3% THC. Well, in some countries overseas, they draw the line at 1% THC. So if there's a product that was made in another country that has 0.9% THC, it may be legal in that country, but if it gets shipped into the US, it's now a controlled substance. So really understanding not just the global framework, but the regulations in each country, in each state regarding hemp and marijuana, and how products are going to flow, because those are our biggest challenges. As our clients grow globally, these are the big issues that we're dealing with from a legal standpoint.
Thank you, Brent. So there are opportunities for regulatory opportunities at a national level, but there are also some regulatory risks on an international level, which is something that we wanted to make clear. Every country currently is using its own roadmap on how to legalize or decriminalize. Even within nations today, and we know this in Canada, but certainly in the United States where it's still federally legal, standardization across those regulations that would help support and facilitate import and export, for instance, trade across nations, is currently not existent. So again, an opportunity, but also a risk. So continue to go around to discuss sort of the opportunity and risks and how from regulatory to commercial and import-export. I wanted to sort of talk a little bit to Rami about your experience at PwC and how you're beginning to now see interest at all levels from other adjacent markets looking in. So maybe if you can speak a little bit about those trends and where do you see maybe risks and opportunities?
No, absolutely. So I think the first interest that was generated from our perspective was by pharma companies, specifically pharma companies that are operating in the opioid space. And when in Canada they introduced the medical cannabis program, they needed to understand what's happening in this landscape, how it's going to impact their product, specifically from a pain perspective, and they needed to understand whether this was a growth opportunity or risk that they needed to mitigate. But since then, we've seen less interest on the pharma side because their business model is more around, I want to operate in an environment that's IP protected. So with cannabis, you can't really protect it from an IP perspective. And I want to operate in an environment where I can make therapeutic claims. And today, based on the regulations, it's very hard and there's not enough research. Also, from a pharma perspective, if you think from a prescription perspective and you look at the GW Pharma, which has an FDA-approved product that's in the US, that's in Canada, to be quite honest, their experience hasn't been very positive because they've made a lot of investment. It has been a 20-year journey and the returns haven't been phenomenal. So what we're seeing is a shift more towards pharma companies that have a disproportionately larger consumer wellness division. So looking at the natural health segment, looking at the OTC, even though the regulations are not very clear at this stage because you can't have a DIN for cannabis product, but these are the ones that are more actively exploring. Beverage alcohol, obviously we've seen many of them explore the opportunity because it has a cannibalization factor, so they need to replace the lost revenues with a new social product that people can use. And then we're starting to see more on the pet care side, people exploring the opportunity with cannabis. And we've seen a number of tobacco companies enter the space, even though it's not cannibalizing tobacco, it's a complementary product, and they can use the investment that they've made over the past few years in a non-combustible innovation that they can apply to cannabis and then introduce it to the market. So I think the next few years, I think the nature of the competition, the basis of the competition is going to change tremendously, because what these established CPG organization, pharma organization, they bring IP, they bring innovation, they bring consumer, they bring brands, and I think the competition is going to be way more intense and very different.
In 2017, I want to say, and where's my chief knowledge officer? It could be 2018. There was about $4 billion in investment, total global investment in the cannabis industry. That number doubled next year to almost 8-9 billion. And that was primarily driven by large enterprises across these other large industries coming in. So pharma, big alcohol, big tobacco, big agro. And then soon now we're also seeing fast-moving packaged goods in food and beverages also coming in. So certainly a very important trend and driving force as we continue to look at, again, risks and opportunities around the cannabis sector. So let's talk, given that we're beginning to see this diversification of the forces and the industry involved and the stakeholders in the industry, let's talk a little bit about the investment opportunities and the flow of funds, really. So why don't we start maybe with you, Matt? You've been an early investor, very early investor in the United States. First of all, what are the things that you've learned through your experience in being a pioneer and investing in the U.S. that you can be applied, if not seen also happening across investment outside of the U.S. and North America?
Patience. What a great panel. Let me just say one thing real quick. I think it'd be helpful. I don't know how many people in here have a long history with cannabis, but how many people in here have considered themselves to be in a technology business now or have been involved in a technology business in your lifetime? A lot of people. How many people in here have been involved in a science-based business, biotech type business? Much less. Consider that potentially the cannabis plant might also be a technology. And you're hearing a lot of wonderful things up here, all being true. Let's put byproducts to the side for the second, just so you can think about all the different product categories and all the things we're talking about. This plant is a technology, similar to the founders of what Apple and Microsoft were dealing with, different type of technology. These are cannabinoids, molecules that internally help us reconnect a little bit. We're trying to achieve internal homeostasis. Who wants to achieve balance in your life? Somehow we've forgotten everything's trying to disrupt the world, and all of a sudden, I think we're trying to heal it a little bit and reconnect, and that's internal. And so these cannabinoids are phenomenal. There's at least 80 or so active, hundreds, who knows, we don't even know yet. You guys know THC, you know CBD, but there are so many of these that we have to actually figure out how the pieces work internally, and then how do we deliver that to the consumer? That's why you hear beverage and you hear smokable and edible and sublingual. We have receptors internally and externally that receive this. And so we're trying to put those pieces together, and that's what we're all really excited about. Up until now, we've just kind of tried to build the foundation. So back to Giadha's question, you know, it's exciting. What an exciting time to be alive. But I think, you have to kind of look at where we are in terms of the cycle. And there's a way to strategize across the entire supply chain. You just have to think about where you are in a particular market. Some markets started a little bit earlier. Some are just getting started. And if in our mind, sorry to kind of go off on a tangent, but we think about the world in three categories today. Retail, cultivation, manufacturing for us is sort of step one. You have to kind of have that framework in an environment in order to have an industry. In a lot of ways, that got a little bit excited, and you're seeing these companies trade at pretty high multiples. Today, you've seen some pullback. Don't fear, that's healthy. Right? This is more similar to 2007-8 real estate than it is the internet rush. Because there's assets, there's cash flow, but what are they? What are they worth, and who has what? That's what they're trying to figure out. So I think in that world, you're going to see a lot of credit and debt, billions of dollars. You're seeing it happen right now with all the top companies. It's healthy. Cheaper cost of capital, non-dilutive. This is healthy for the market. I think it's a good response. I think it's going to help the market. But it's also going to make a lot of people really figure out who they are in these companies. So that's how we think about that asset class for the time being, at least in North America. B2B companies really have grown mostly. Emily and I have done a tremendous amount of work together, and boy, she has just been phenomenal. Back to female founders, oh my gosh, this industry has really got a special purpose in the world. Right? I mean, it's unbelievable. We have such an opportunity and responsibility, and together, oh my goodness, what we can do. But B2B type companies, what's Salesforce doing? Where's Oracle? Where are all these companies that are supposed to provide service to large business? Look at the numbers that New Frontier's throwing out. This volume is going to continue to grow. Servicing companies had to do that in markets where there was large volumes. Has not been large volumes today in Canada, but with new product categories that will grow. So we think B2B companies have not had their big exits yet. Fortune 500s, public markets, I think are going to really take interest in these companies. They're getting to scale. I think that's the next wave. Past that, third strategy, the future really is B2C. What are we going to give to the consumer? Again, Apple, Steve Jobs, in a garage, understood technology. Consumer had no idea what was coming. That to me is the future. It's a B2C aspect. What are we going to create for the consumer, and how are we going to change lives?
Thank you so much. And you know what, it just occurred to me, we should have done this, and thank you, Matt, for engaging the audience. How many people know the difference between cannabis and hemp? How many people know the difference between THC and CBD? So maybe very quickly, we should very quickly. The industry, we look at the cannabis industry as a whole, but the cannabis industry, as sort of Brent alluded to and Matt alluded to, is also divided in two pieces. The cannabis plant has CBD and THC. THC is a component that it has psychotropic effects, is what makes you feel high. CBD is another cannabinoid, however, that does not have any psychotropic effect, and is what you see used more commonly and widely as what some call a nutraceutical substance. It helps with sleep, it helps with a variety of things, and chronic pain and other things. Hemp, which is cannabis, let's call it a distant cousin, does not have THC, or has very low percentage of THC, therefore it can be grown to primarily produce and extract CBD. The world is beginning to embrace this difference quite a bit, and it has an implication when it comes to investment and opportunities and navigating, especially outside of North America. And the reason that is there are actually only 3 countries in the world today that have actually fully legalized what we call adult use or recreational use. And that would be Canada, Uruguay, the United States, I guess, doesn't count. The United States has 3 states, and very soon Australia is looking to do that. The rest of the world talks about CBD and hemp, and that's just the truth today. It may change because of some potential advanced applications of THC into pharmaceutical type medicine, But as of today, you really need to think about medical CBD, hemp versus cannabis when it comes to understanding the global space. So with that little introduction, which hopefully was not more confusing and more clarifying, Emily, you have, not only were you indeed a pioneer, if not one of the first women to lead investment in the cannabis industry in North America, but you and your firm have taken the lead in making some pretty bold steps in investing outside of North America. Can you speak a little bit about that and your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, back when we first launched the fund, the US was extremely fragmented. It still is, but it was before some of the things that came into play, like the Cole memo that gave us a little bit more support on the banking side, some of those things that have now been rescinded. But so naturally, we always were looking at other countries, and actually one of the first places we did deploy capital on the plant touching side was in Canada. And that was because they did have a federally legal medical program, and Health Canada was creating a framework around it. It felt like it was a bit more organized, and it was something that we felt very comfortable participating in very early. And in fact, our first holding in the first fund was GW Pharmaceutical, which is a UK biotech company, which now has an approved FDA drug in the US market called Epidiolex. So we've been branching into these other places, but most recently we've been branching more into places that are equatorial in their location. And many of the reasons for that are because cannabis grows on this really interesting light and dark cycle very, very well, where there's 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And so being equatorial and some of the locations of those cultivation sites is incredibly attractive to improve the cost to produce and to drive down the price, because we do see that commoditization of this product is coming, especially when you contemplate that cannabis, when you break down all of the various molecules, which are so incredibly nuanced and interesting, and we have yet to really tap into that, is going to be like a very key ingredient into many, many different end applications. And I think that we just, right now we're talking in pretty gross terms of THC and CBD, but it's far more complicated than that, and there's so much potential to uncover there. But the net is that we are going to have to figure out how to produce this at a much more cost-effective way in order to get it into that global supply chain to be able to be the active ingredients within some of these end products. So we've done some investing into cultivation and processing in Colombia. One of our operations is the first GMP certified facility there, which is incredibly important, again, to be kind of to the points that have been made about the compliance and regulations. The regulations today will likely change for tomorrow. It's happened time and time again in this industry, and as an investor, it's important for us to look at the information we have about what has transpired to be able to try to look around corners to see what might be coming next, because there's no question that there's product market fit with cannabis. People want to consume cannabis in many, many forms and factors, and I think that it's really important to understand that the thing that really does hold things back is regulations, and whether or not you understand how that can impact the scalability of a business. Now, I would also argue that I'm very pro-regulation because I think it's created a safe structure for people to access safe products. We're seeing an exploitation of what happened in the Farm Bill in the US around CBD, and there's a lot of products on the shelves that are not being tested, have dangerous compounds in them, and the same thing with the vape market on the illicit vaporization market. So I'm very pro-regulation when it is protecting the end consumer, and I think it's very important. But anyway, back to Colombia. That was one of the ways we branched out from the US, and very excited about that. Very excited. Everywhere we deploy capital, we see job creation, and we're seeing data around that job creation, which is incredibly exciting. And it's just changing the way that people see this and the way that the product is flowing, such that it's our intention to see that it does not continue to flow into the illicit market. And most recently, we've also invested into the Mexican market, which is, for us, I mean, we're pretty bold. We've been investing pretty early. Like we invested heavily into California before the legalization was passed through with Proposition 64. We try to really spend time understanding how the regulators are feeling about it, so we understand the likelihood that things will move in a direction that will be beneficial to where we're deploying capital, and we spend a lot of time and resources on that as a fund and as fund managers, and we spend time in the markets understanding what the sentiment of society is around that as well. So we've recently invested into Mexico on the premise that we do believe that there will be some interesting regulations rolling out, And as an investor, Matt and I always talk about this, it's always as much about timing as it is about what you're paying for it and the way that you're entering into it through a structure. And for us, the timing has been critical to achieving a lot of the growth we've seen in our portfolios over the last 6 years in trying to get in early and kind of leveraging what we see as real risk versus perceived risk by using the information that we've gathered through our in-market diligence and getting really up close to the regulators to understand where they're coming from.
Thank you.
Yeah. One other point on that you kind of asked a question on, which is, how many people in the world today have access to cannabis?
Demand is 344 billion.
And
that's illicit
how many?
And legal.
344 million. How many people are there in the world? 8 billion. If you're in this room, you're early, right? I mean, we talk about hemp and cannabis. Hemp in China is a thing now. India, Africa, billions of people are about to be exposed to this. So when you think about what we've all been working so hard on here, the whole world's paying attention. Emily talked about the FDA case that is a company we're involved with, so we're paying very close attention. They want to protect humans. Bills are one thing, but they have a responsibility, and the whole world's trying to see, okay, well, what are they going to say they can do with various products from hemp? What is CBD? What can it be, and how can it be delivered? What color can the packaging be? So one of your questions was, how can we take what we've learned here to the rest of the world in the international environment? They're already looking. We just have to use our experience and try to make each step a better one than the one before.
So if you're starting to get the feeling of this is a complex, multi-layered industry that's gone from North America to really viral to across the globe, regulation, operation, investment, and operation cannot be left out of the equation. So Diane, you have not only have you started are operating currently in the cannabis industry, but you've also done that on a multinationally. So can you speak a little bit about your experience, lesson learned again, with a view on risks and opportunities?
Yes, certainly. So we also, as investors, invested in the cannabis industry in Canada quite early on. I would say that after a few of our investments, which went exceptionally well for us, started giving us a little bit more comfort. We were invited to go to Jamaica to look at an investment in a farm, and the answer was no, right away. No, I'm sorry, we're not interested. But for some reason it kept sitting with me, and I think the reason is what Emily said, is that intuitively it seemed to fit that, you know, the climate and the environment, and when you understand how the plant grows, these things become incredibly important. So went to Jamaica, and that kind of takes me to the regulatory side of things, because before we even made an investment, we had spent about a year really getting to know the government, looking at the regulations. The Jamaican government amended the Dangerous Drug Act in 2015. We looked at what they were going to look like. They were going to look very similar to what Health Canada had put in place, which was really important when we started to determine that we were going to not only just be investors, but actually we were going to found a company that was going to grow, process, but also become heavily involved in the science of this. And so we knew that when we were selling into Germany, for example, we were going to have to not just have German GMP, but we were going to have regulations out of Jamaica that would make the German regulators comfortable. And I think that's a really critical point. Another point that was raised a little bit earlier is exportation. I think, Brent, it was you who was saying that export regs are going to be very critical, and there's a lot of countries, even though this is becoming a very well-developed industry worldwide, there's a lot of countries that haven't figured that part out yet. Jamaica, for example, actually this week just released their first draft for our stakeholder comments. So we're a little bit putting the wheels on the cart and moving the cart and doing all of these things operationally as well, if that makes sense. And so part of the other piece of this, and we only focus on medicinal, was the importance of the science, and it was something John said right in his opening remarks, is that we have to realize that, and we hope as regulators around the world look at this, they look at the science of this. And from a JMCC standpoint, we are very focused on being involved with our customers in clinical trials. We're the exclusive grower for the first phase human trials for the FDA orphan drug acute myeloid leukemia. We are doing a whole lot of those things around the world, and the reason is just because we believe that the collaboration is necessary in order to advance the industry as a whole and bring that credibility to the space. And that, as an investor, putting my investor hat on, not my grower hat, just gives me greater comfort in the market as a whole.
I want to paint a picture for you, and I don't know if we can take questions. I was hoping we can. I need someone to say whether it's an A or an A, otherwise we do have more questions that I can pose you. But let me paint a picture. The global age of cannabis, why is it so true? And I think you're starting to get the feel for it. Currently, Canada is the only country that is truly having any play in terms of the import-export market. Europe, in fact, grandfathered Canada in as far as allowing imports from a country that has recreational laws. Usually they do not allow. But Canada currently is helping Europe meet their massive demand for CBD product that they cannot meet because, well, a variety of reasons, one of which is there's not a lot of land to grow it in. So Canada now, however, is also having some difficulties exporting to Europe, so they're starting to import from Latin America. So now that's given a nice incentive for Latin American nations to begin to figure out how do they cultivate. Now, mind you, all of this with no international regulations and no international standards. While all of this is happening, let's cross over to Africa, where we recently were speaking to various ministers in various sub-Saharan nations, agro-based economies. They're looking at their cultivation of tobacco, which is mostly what they do, primarily to China. As you know, China already has quite a bit of stake in Africa. In fact, they own most of the infrastructure as far as transportation, telecommunication, and all minerals. So these African nations are looking at Europe having this massive demand for CBD, being imported from Canada, but really from Latin America. And here they are with agro-based economies, and they're thinking, you know what, maybe we should be growing hemp and not tobacco. And then let's cross over to Asia Pacific. And Matt alluded to this. So what's happening in Asia? Well, let me tell you, China produces today 95% of all world hemp production. There are 2 provinces in China, one of which basically meets most of this production, and their entire crop is automated. They literally have drones that track the cycles and everything else. They're just currently using that hemp for textile. Well, that hemp could be used for CBD. That hemp could also be used for battery life fuel extension. That hemp could also be used potentially for replacing graphene and silicone for semiconductivity. And then next to China, you have India, who also is a massive agro-based economy, who's looking over at China thinking, if they do that, make that little transition, what are we gonna do? It's the global age of cannabis. It really is a global phenomenon, and it's one that if we think is not gonna have massive global socioeconomic impact, then we're very, very naive. It is going to touch all of us, whether we like it or not. So what we hope, and the people at this panel hope to do, is to do so responsibly, with good information, fact-based information, good intelligence, and hope and positivity, I guess.
Did you see that white paper somebody wrote that spelled out why Donald Trump should build the wall out of hemp concrete?
I didn't know, but that sounds like a great idea.
I mean, it's cheaper, it's biodegradable, just never know what's coming next, but it's crazy, isn't it?
You never know. Can we take questions from the audience? Great.
I'll take both, okay. Hi, Wendy Broad, Janus Conferences. I don't know if you can speak to the science of phosphate fertilizer. Is it a perceived risk or a real risk in growing anything?
Is this question for someone in particular or anyone?
Anyone that could help me understand if it's a perceived or real risk to be using, or is it even used, phosphate fertilizer?
We don't use fertilizer. There are really strict rules country by country. I think Canada is now at somewhere around 91 banned contaminants. So in our grow, we are very careful with what goes anywhere near the plant. It's grown in pot. In some cases, it's in coconut husk and not in soil. So fertilizers, nutrients, we try to grow as close to organic and natural as possible.
Well, we hear a lot about the medical use. We hear about consumption through smoking, through vaping, through edibles. Now I'm seeing an emergence of absorption-based products for CBD, like cosmeceuticals. That's a way of consuming it. How do you control the amount you're consuming? Has there been a lot of research on how it's being absorbed into the body, the quantities, the effects? I mean, is there some of these products are coming out, it seems like, in advance of a lot of the research. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say you're absolutely right. A lot of those products are coming out in advance of research because there's just not as much research as we'd all like to see. There is actually quite a bit of research going on outside of the US specifically, but we see a lot of it in Israel, and there's a lot happening now in some of these other countries. So it is absolutely happening in advance of it, and I think that's why the FDA has been so clear that you can't be making any claims on any of these products, because even if you can share an anecdote that someone enjoyed the experience and they felt much, much better, you can't say that you can't draw that causation between the two things, or else you're going to run up into an issue with the FDA, especially on the CBD products. But I think that the industry, the product companies that are trying to do this very well and very responsibly are extrapolating dosage information from other form factors, and they are doing their own internal kind of market research, I would more equivocate it to try to understand what that does happen, like how that happens through an absorption of a patch or through something sublingual or any of these other form factors, because the brands, it's getting so competitive that if you put something on the market and you're a real brand that's trying to actually build a real company, not one of these fly-by-night CBD get-rich-quick companies, but a real company, then it's more deleterious to your brand to have it get out there and have people come back and say, I had an awful experience with that. And that's something we saw a quick lashback in the industry when Maureen Dowd famously ate an entire chocolate bar and kind of freaked out in her hotel room for several hours. For anybody who's ever had that experience, just put on a movie and drink some water and have a meal and just, chill out.
Ice cream works.
Yeah, no, what happened after that was that the industry really quickly reacted to that and really got clear on how these things were segmented up into dosage so that you could not easily make that same mistake, and so that you could understand. We have a whole thing about go low, go slow in terms of the amount of cannabis and active ingredients that you're consuming. So the short answer is it's really resting on the companies who want to establish their reputations to kind of lead the way on that, but I'm open to what other people.
Actually, Martín, would you mind, in Uruguay, how have you tried to sort of address or regulate sort of the various ways there was intake methodology? Are there limitations to what is allowed in the market?
On the medical field, it's on the doctor. But on the adult side of this market, we have established some limits for a maximum. For example, people who want to buy in the pharmacy for recreational purposes or adult purposes, they can buy a maximum of 10 grams per week and a maximum of 480 grams per year per adult user. And also the regulation established the pickup, the strains that we can deliver through the pharmacies, and those private companies working with the license and in the producing and distributing the cannabis only can sell that production to the network of the pharmacies that are in the system. So people who is registered to buy only can buy in those pharmacies.
Makes sense. Thank you.
One important thing that I think is connected with everything that we are talking about is that about the regulations. I'm specifically talking. One of the main regulations that I think that is holding back the development of this activity, not only for the recreational purposes, but besides that, for medical or R&D activities, is the access to banking services. In some countries, as we do, we still don't have any bank, public or private, which is providing services to the industry. And that's weird, because our system is one of the tight and most regulated in all over the world. We know exactly where is the production, where is any package, who bought, if it's in the pharmacy, it's in one van. And for us, it's a very big problem, especially because it's not a problem for another big countries or another bigger economies. So thinking about the import-export process, this is even worse. So I would like to say here, perhaps we have a lot of people that can help with that issue. Please contact me after the panel. Thank you.
I wanted to ask one last question to Rami, because we all sort of bring more of sort of an inside-out perspective. We are in the cannabis industry, even though, for instance, our clients are outside, but we really kind of do. Rami, we only have a couple more minutes. Can you leave us with some thoughts about what's next in terms of, the rest of the world as far as the commercial world, looking into the cannabis industry, given that I know a lot of PwC clients are sort of looking, if not doing?
Yeah, so I think what surprised me about the discussion is that most of the discussion around investments was focused on the plant, on botanical cannabis. I think in reality, with a lot of the advanced industries, the way they think about cannabis, it's a raw material. It's going to go into one product, whether it's vape, whether it's edibles, so it's a simple raw material. And there's a lot of investments going to low-cost regions, which it makes sense. You don't want to grow indoor, you want to grow outdoors, you want to be able to extract it and do it at a low cost. But a lot of them are saying, maybe this is not the future, maybe the future is more in synthetic. Once we understand the formulations, maybe the cost of production is lower, so synthetic cannabinoids. Other investors are looking at biosynthesis, and there's almost 32 companies at this stage globally that are thinking about this. Some are more advanced than the others. I don't think from a feasibility perspective it's coming very soon, but it is coming for sure. And at some point when it hits and it's successful, I think it's going to disrupt all the investments that are taking place into cultivation specifically. But regardless, this is an industry that's going to stay, it's going to grow, it's just the nature of it is going to change. So that's how we speak with clients and understand their thinking about cannabis of the future.
G, before you do the last word, can I say one thing? I think it's really important at the end of our time here that something Emily and I talk a lot about, and I know our panelists would agree with. If you're not in this industry yet and you're coming in, we welcome you, A, but B, come in with a collaborative mentality. We have a really special opportunity to build an industry the right way from the beginning that will touch every person in this world. The plant doesn't see color, race, religion, sexual orientation. It wants all of us. It's internal. If you're coming in now, the biggest players in the world are not in. There's an opportunity, but together we're stronger. And encourage all of you to come in with that mentality, and that's one that I think we all share.
Do we have time for one more question? No.
I have a question.
Well, then can I just have a lasting thought? We talk about the economy. We're the International Economic Forum of the Americas, which, by the way, it's a great honor to be here, but also to have this topic addressed in such a serious and responsible venue. If we think we're going into a recession, and I know the R word, we're not allowed to say it, well, yeah, maybe we are. If we are, one of the things that maybe you want to think about as well is that when markets go into recessions, there are a few industries that actually do very well and that survive because they help, and they tend to be alcohol, alas, tobacco, and in this case, cannabis would probably fall into that. The beauty there is that it's not just for recreational uses, is that it's also for medical uses. So with that, thank you so much for your attention, and I cannot thank this wonderful panel enough. Thank you so much.